So, what is a birthright? That's our question for today, I think. Because according to Webster's Dictionary, it's a right, a privilege, or a possession to which a person is entitled by birth. It's a pretty simple explanation, right? We probably could have guessed it on our own. But for better or for worse, the emotional and the relational and societal impacts that play out from birthright happen in ways that end up being so much more complicated than this. I mean, a birthright, it can give us identity, belonging, a sense of continuity, and the chance to be part of a legacy. We like to pride ourselves on our family and our cultural heritage. A few weeks ago, we celebrated our birthright as Americans. And many of us who are here this morning may be here because our faith was handed down to us by our parents and our grandparents. But a birthright can also sometimes create conflict between those who benefit from the birthright and those who are left out. I mean, all you have to do is turn on Game of Thrones, or I don't know, did anyone watch Succession? I wasn't able to watch it, but I know a couple of people did. It's basically about people in conflict over their birthright. And from this rises all kinds of high drama. Because what happens when there is great dynastic wealth and power at play is that people seem to fight over it, right? It's the kind of thing that can tear families apart. It may even be that birthright is what's underlying much of our enduring societal strife. I think maybe that's because along with all of those wonderful things that we talked about here that birthright can give us, it also conveys power. And we know that power can be a blessing or a curse, or both at the same time. So today we have placed before us the story of Jacob and Esau, which is full of all of the complexities of what happens when there is a birthright. Jacob and Esau are twins. They're born of the same womb, almost at the same moment. Yet, due to the ancient Hebrew version of winner takes all inheritance law, it matters which of them makes it into the world first. So it's no wonder that they are portrayed as jockeying away for position long before they're even born. I mean, I don't know, that when I read this, all I could think of was that, you know how sometimes when babies are inside of you and they move and you can see people's stomachs rimple? And just imagine if the two of them, and they're duking out and all their rippling stomachs. Had a good laugh around that one. Now, their father, Isaac, is the head of what has become a very wealthy, nomadic, herding family group. They have lots of flocks. But he's also Abraham's son. So he's the bearer of God's promise that from their line would spring a great nation that would become a blessing to all the peoples of the earth. So it's clear that the spoils are big and the stakes are pretty high here. Our narrative puts all the cards on the table for us. Esau's born first. The birthright, it should be his. No conversation. But then there's God's words to Rebekah that hint that the tables might be turned, and that will leave generational division in its wake. We're also given these personality differences between the two of them that kind of define this conflict for us, and this favoritism that pits them against each other. I mean, Dad, he favors his macho, athletic son, Esau. Mom, on the other hand, is closer to the bookish and clever Jacob. His family sounds really real, right? I mean, we can all think of times when stuff like this happens in families. It's clear that even without the conflict over the inheritance issue, there are all the seeds of jealousy and strife all over the place in this story of this family. Now, we would think that the father's favorite, who's the strongest, the best hunter and provider, would be the right one in a family that is reliant on successful protection and seasonal movement of all of their vast flocks across wild terrain that can sometimes be dangerous. But in this case, clever trickery wins the day. Now, I'm not sure how to feel about this. Sorry, I'm going to move that down a little bit. I'm not sure how to feel about this because, on the one hand, I love to cheer for Jacob, the underdog. I mean, how many of us don't love a good underdog story, right? My favorite of the underdog stories are often the ones where the little guy wins through sheer wit. You know, all the big strong folks are trying to just win through brute force, and then the one little guy sees the clever solution that nobody else looked for. That's great stuff. But I have to say, it's also true that what Jacob does here, it smacks of manipulation and kind of cheating. Do you think? The interesting thing is, it almost comes across as if it's a little bit cheeky here. But in a later passage, Jacob goes so far as to disguise himself as Esau so that he can trick his aged, blind, and dying father into laying the blessing of the birthright onto him instead of Esau, his brother. Now, Jacob ends up having to run away for 20 years after that, and his relationship with his brother never really recovers. They end up with wars and it's a lot of stuff. Anyway, the way the narrative is woven together, it seems like the various sources of all of these stories that have come together and the compilers who put them together weren't sure what to make of Jacob any more than we are. Over and over again, Jacob is painted both as the chosen patriarch of God's covenant people, but also his very name tells us something about who he is that's not altogether flattering, because his name means usurper or trickster. So I'm going to invite people to have a look at our painting for today. You know, we've been working through this series. I've made a couple copies that are in color, so maybe you can share them around. If you pass some back, and here. Some people didn't get them. How about over here? Did people get them? There, Laura. Let me see. Sure. Yeah, this is a good one, isn't it? Here, pass them back. Is there someone who doesn't have access to one? Oh, great. Give me one. Don, you're lucky because
thank you.
The PDF of the leaflet has it in color. All right. So have a look at this painting. It's, I think, really captures all of this mixed up message of blessing and strife that comes from this story about birthright. Because this picture captures that pivotal moment when Esau makes his way into the world first, and he's got his brother right there dogging his heel. Thus it will be for their whole life together, right? It's not at all clear, if you look at it, whose perspective we're meant to take, right? I mean, it could be that we're seeing the scene from Jacob's point of view. And we're looking up and we're grasping on to that foot as we watch our older brother, slightly older brother, disappear into the world ahead of us. And you can almost hear Jacob crying out in that internal chant of the younger sibling, "Wait for me," right? Y'all know that one, right? But the other possibility is that we could be looking at the whole scene through the eyes of the midwife as she witnesses that birth. Either way, the focal point is right there in the center, right on the joining point where they are connected. These two brothers. That connection at that moment would have made that a very difficult birth. Either way you look at it, it made their lives, in fact, very difficult too. So the next question I had when I looked at this picture was, where's the birth canal? Where's the birth canal? See, there's kind of two circles there, two circles in the picture. It's as if the picture itself wants us to see this story from both perspectives. Because at the top, there's that heart shape around Esau's feet. That could be it. But it could also be that spot at the bottom, that place that Jacob's hand is emerging from. In fact, the coloring sets both of them in light. It's calling us to look through both of these windows into this moment. And it gives us a sense that there is, in fact, no easy answers here, I think. So then look at the gold winding its way through this. Does anyone remember how this artist is using the gold in the pictures? Yeah, it's winding like an S here, but she's been using it in all of her pictures. We've had a couple different artists in the series, and they'll repeat some of their motifs and stuff. So in her case, she uses gold to symbolize the places where God is acting in the story. So in this case, it's kind of interesting because I think it starts kind of right there at the base of Jacob's hand. And it swirls down and then up right through where they are joined together, and then it curls around Esau's feet. But then I think it's kind of pushing out through that portal at the top. I kind of was reading this as if it's saying to us that even when we humans get stuck in age-old and too common patterns of sibling struggle, that God is pushing us to birth something more out of that, something better. The artist helps us out. She gives us a little bit about what she's thinking. She said that she wanted to portray Jacob entering the world gripping for power and reaching for what he believes that he is entitled to receive. Through this, she is inviting us, the viewer, to confront the ways in which we too grip for power and control and entitlement in our own lives. But then she wanted to have the gold dancing all through that boundary between these two brothers locked in conflict over all of this stuff. Because she wanted to represent the ways that God works even through our worst times and moments of discord. So, what does the story of Jacob and Esau tell us today? What are we meant to make of the ways that for good or for ill, birthright shapes our families, our communities, and our world? Does anyone remember an old 1970s pop song called One Tin Soldier?
Yeah.
You remember it?
Yeah.
I could count on my folky musicians to remember that one. Anyone else remember it?
What is it?
One Tin Soldier.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, children, to a story. That one.
Yeah.
So in the story, there's a village on the mountain and a village down in the valley, right? And the village on the mountain has a great treasure. So what does the village on the valley do?
They want to go get it.
They decide they're going to invade the village on the mountain to try to take the treasure. And they go at war, and it tells the story of all the terrible things that happen. And they finally prevail, and they get to the treasure, and what do they find? Does anyone remember? No, it's not nothing. It's not what you would expect, though.
Yeah. But
It is. And no one remembers? They get in there, and what they find is a stone with the words peace on earth written on it. And like the people on the mountain had said, we can share this with all of you. It's a wonderful reminder of our own birthright in Jesus. Like, think of those angels at his birth, calling out to the whole of humanity, here comes the Savior, peace on earth, goodwill to all, right? That's a real birthright, isn't it? And it's something that everybody can have and everybody can share, and you don't have to fight over it. You don't have to. In fact, fighting over it ruins it. So getting back to the beginning, rights, privileges, possessions. Every one of us, I think at every time and place, right back to those great characters of the Bible throughout all of history, even to today, all of us wrestle with how we got them and what their just distribution at home and beyond should look like. I was made aware of this, especially because in the last 2 weeks, I've been in Lincolnshire, in England, and there, the local struggle is over whether or not this very rural, pretty much entirely farming community, think Iowa, whether or not they should open up a shuttered Royal Air Force base to welcome refugees from Afghanistan, Albania, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. A lot of them. They want to house several thousand, I think, quite a few. Yet in the same weeks, I was reading all of my news feeds of my American papers. And it covered stuff like in the Bay Area, where there's conflict over whether or not people want to have affordable housing built in their neighborhoods. And I read about a nation who's divided over the distribution of coveted university spots by race and income, or alumni legacy and donor status. All of that stuff is about birthright, right? And who gets it and who doesn't. So I wonder if the story of Jacob and Esau is God asking us to ponder the choices that we have about how we handle our various birthrights. It's like God saying to us, what if we were to set aside all of that grasping after more privilege and possessions? What would happen if we did that? What would that look like? And then also, what would happen if we didn't? What would all of the enmity and the strife that was left behind as our legacy, would it be worth it? Would it be worth it if we chose that path? So I want to close with something from the theologian David Thomas. It's called Dreams Are Our Birthright. God dreamed us into existence, and God in turn implants dreams within us. To pursue our hopes and dreams requires courage, which is the basic orientation of an act of hope. To fail to dream a better future is to deny God, the God of faithful love. And it is to deny ourselves our own birthright to this love.